Thank you very much. Let me just ask a couple of questions, Greg, and then I'll throw it open. I mean, you managed to make a speech there without mentioning the words George Osborne. And so I just want to ask you, really simply...
The Chancellor and George Osborne.
All right, well, how dependent is delivering the Northern Powerhouse on George Osborne?
Well, George deserves enormous credit for having recognised the importance, not just for the North, but the whole nation, to push this agenda. And he has been a formidable champion of it. But I think one of the great things about where we are is this isn't an idea of mine or Phillip's or people in this room that is being pitched to the government. We've now got some years of experience of this, and it is, I would say, not only recognised to be a success, but actually it's changed the agenda. I don't think the question is anymore, should we devolve? I don't think you'll find, I hope you won't find, any of the candidates for leadership of the parties saying what we need to do is we need to reverse this, we need to centralise power back in Westminster and Whitehall. That, I don't see anyone saying that or even thinking it. The question is, how far we can go, how much further we can go, and can we increase the pace? And so I think the agenda has changed. I think we've turned the direction from literally 100 years of centralisation to a question about the pace of decentralisation, and that is now embedded in the government. So I'm confident that whatever happens in terms of the leadership of the country, that is now there and very prominent. But what I would say, just as a kind of a grace note on that perhaps, is that the forces of centralisation, especially in Whitehall, have not gone away. They are powerful, and there are people who, for many years, for many decades, have been used to gradually eroding the power from cities, towns, and counties. No doubt they will assert themselves with the same arguments that this is not the time to go further, let's consolidate what we've got and all the rest of it. So I think we need to have a big fight for this agenda, and this is why I think it's a good opportunity to meet today. I will do that. I'm sure the Chancellor will do it, and you've got my colleague James Wharton coming later today. I think the time is right for it. I think everyone accepts the case, but for those of us that want to go further, now is the time to make that case.
But I mean, people are nervous because, as you acknowledged there, I mean, these things, relinquishing power, giving cities and regions control over tax receipts requires political champions at the centre to say, yes, we've got to give it up. And George Osborne is that person at the moment, but he may not be there. So, I mean, you ended your speech by beseeching the audience to make sure they choose somebody who is for and not against, which suggests you do think there are people who are for and against on offer.
I think it's less people.
Which one's for and which one's against?
Well, it's not. I think. Well, actually, I think the contenders, I think, get it. I've worked very closely with my colleagues in government. I think it's more when these things when powers have been centralised in the past, it's often been the bureaucracy reasserting itself. It's been the machine just kind of gradually eroding the case for devolution. And that's why I think you need political leadership to counter that. When we kicked this process off, when the government was formed in 2010, the coalition government, I was appointed, my first job in government, my first title was the Minister for Decentralisation. Now, you could argue that is a paradoxical term. You've got a central government, Minister of State for decentralisation. But actually, I think it was quite a shrewd insight, I assume, on the part of David Cameron, that actually, if you want to do this, you need to have someone fighting for it within the government explicitly. You need to fight that battle centrally in order to devolve the powers. And I think we will continue to need that.
Phillip?
I think that let me put it like this, there's a shift to the poor on the both left and the right of the Conservative Party, and I think it's unavoidable. I think that it's very interesting, for instance, that Andrea Leadsom talks about the end of austerity, and she's meant to be from the right, So that's a little interesting complication. And I think Theresa May has always been informed by these wider concerns. So I really do agree with Greg, and I think that what constitutes one nation conservatism is the battle. I don't think it's the place of one nation conservatism is now challengeable by anybody. So the interesting question for me is the following: is what is the most successful one nation conservatism that the Conservative Party has followed? And I would argue that the free market, purely Thatcherite approach hasn't worked for too many people. And you know, this is acknowledged across the centre-right. You know, Tim Montgomery would argue this as well. The key task for Conservatives is to develop a form of capitalism that works for ordinary people. And arguably Conservatives have never done this. And what I would like to see the Conservative Party doing is creating a world where it's worth starting a business. It's worth creating a small business because you create a stake in the economy that will be rewarded and shared. And actually, it's bloody difficult, if you forgive the language, to create a small... The amount of bureaucracy, the amount of risk, you have to often take loans on your own house and put your family's security at risk. What I really would like to see realised is a version of conservatism that recognised that the trends in global capitalism are towards monopoly or towards kind of oligopoly, and we create a way in which the small guy or girl has an equal shot. Because here's the rub. If we don't create an asset-rich population, if we don't create a population that has something more than wages, what we're going to have to see when these people retire is a massive extension of the state so that people aren't living on the street. It makes sense to create a new conservative endowment of everybody. And I think the injunction to be a workers' party is the right injunction, but we also need to be a party of owners. We also need to be a party of traders. Because I think where we are is two approaches haven't worked to poverty alleviation. Welfare doesn't work in terms of alleviating poverty. It doesn't transform. It doesn't bounce people back. It actually traps them in something that's incredibly difficult to escape from. And the form of capitalism that we've followed only really works if you're well positioned, if you already have assets, and you're already doing really rather well. That's what's got to change. And I think there's every chance, if we can form what a radical conservative offer might be and put that to the government. You don't have to be a conservative to do this, by the way. I mean, if I was a Labour leader of a Labour council, that's what I would argue. I would argue that for the government to make good on its one nation promise. And I think there's every chance of getting this adopted. And in public policy, what's interesting is that big ideas work. The bigger your idea, the more likely it is to stick. Small ideas tend not to make it through. And what I would now desperately encourage is a big idea about the North, a Council of the North, a no-tax North, something that can get something started again. And I would put that to the new leader of the Conservative Party. And believe you me, they'll read it with interest.
Let's throw this open then. I don't know whether we need any more lights, but we've got some microphones. So yes, there's a hand up right here. Do you think you could bring the microphone to the lady in the jacket and T-shirt, just there?
Hi, hello, I'm Jackie Copley from the Campaign to Protect Rural England. We are very supportive of the Northern Powerhouse and wanting to see the economies of the North growing. But we have a concern about the reuse of brownfield land. The North has a lot of it because of its history, but the National Planning Policy Framework seems to promote more building on greenfield land. And it seems to be that there is the North-South divide. The National Planning Policy Framework might suit southern authorities, but in the North, councils keep getting penalised because of the lack of a 5-year housing land supply. And the whole setup seems to promote developer viability, and so I'm concerned in the discussion about Northern Powerhouse, that the countryside and the environment isn't diminished as a consequence. I think we can do both, promote the North, promote growth, but also get good outcomes for our environment.
Let me take a couple more and then I'll get Greg to respond. Yes, there's one on the end as well.
Helen Pidd from The Guardian. A question for Greg. You're endorsing Theresa May. What evidence is there that she cares about the north of England? And secondly, assuming that George Osborne will step down as Chancellor, who would be the best Chancellor for the north of England?
Good question.
And then yes, in the red. Okay. No, just here. There's a lady in the red there.
Thank you. Hannah David, Planning Futures think tank. I've got a question, please, to Greg. Phillip has mentioned on a couple of occasions a Council of the North, which I think is a very interesting idea. You've talked further about the devolution agenda and that continuing and evolving, and you've referred to pan-regional and cross-border and spatial working together. Do you think that a Council of the North could be the instrument that could push the pan-regional working between authorities with more devolved powers? And are we moving to a new form of regionalism with that idea?
Thank you. Greg, do you want to start with that one and work backwards?
Sure. I think, as always, Philip comes up with challenging ideas. But the good thing about devolution is that you don't need the government to say, you're allowed to create a Council of the North. You can get on with it. In fact, we've got here, I don't know whether, is Joe Anderson here? Has he arrived yet? Well, when Joe comes, he will tell you that the core cities, the big cities, the 8 biggest cities outside London in England, now joined by Glasgow and Cardiff, have formed what they call themselves the Core Cities Cabinet. The leaders meet every month to discuss areas of common interest. They are sufficiently self-confident, quite rightly, that they regularly summon me to attend, to be given my marching orders by them, and they are very effective. They're supported by a good secretariat, and they are very influential. This is something that they have done voluntarily. I didn't ask them or require them to create it. And so I think as you see the cooperation across the North, you see this happening because people want to pool their common interests. So I think the idea that central government needs to bless and to initiate anything that goes on, I think it should be the other way around, as I say. Greater Manchester, City of Manchester, didn't apply to London for the permission to grow and be a success.
What powers would this Council of the North have? Sorry, we'll do the others. But
Well, I think it should have powers to make pan-North asks. So I think it should have powers for retention of taxes. I think it should have powers to, for instance, move resources from one part of the North to the other in development of housing, for example. So one of the problems with the North is it has too few areas for middle-class housing. Those too few areas become incredibly expensive to live in. So if you develop an area of middle-class housing, you can use the value generated by that to develop other areas.
So some of that can be done by itself, but some of it does require Greg Clark's.
Some of it will require, in my view, is just as Transport for the North is set on a legislative footing. I think that the Council for the North will require something similar, but some don't. So our idea that, for instance, graduate retention, what if Nissan in Sunderland had a graduate retention and training scheme with Jaguar Land Rover in Hale Wood and all the points between, so that you realise, if I join and stay in the North, I get a better level of training through being able to go to all parts of this industry and decide where I want to specialise.
Okay.
Listen, I think what I quite like the idea of is the northern leaders, and for that matter, leaders elsewhere, to come to government and say, this is what we want you to do to facilitate our vision. Through Transport for the North, that has been that has a statutory underpinning. The combined authorities, that is, we've created through legislation an ability for joint decisions to be taken. I think that's the right role for people to have the initiative. Christian, can I answer,
Yes,
since I'm invited to Helen's point about Theresa May, who I am supporting in the leadership. Obviously, I've worked very closely with Theresa for many years now, including when I was Director of Policy for the party when we were in opposition. So I've been close to her views for quite a long time now, and I think that she does very much not just get, but can be a champion for this agenda. There are a few relevant parts of her experience that I think have no doubt informed it. One is she's been a local councillor herself for quite a few years at the beginning of her career, and she was an executive member. It was under the committee system, but she chaired the education committee of the council. So she knows about taking decisions locally. She's been a shadow local government secretary when we were in opposition. But I think perhaps more recently, when we've been having devolution discussions, so here in Greater Manchester, for example, the combination of the new Mayor of Greater Manchester with the Police and Crime Commissioner was something that we very much did together, that we thought that it made sense to bring these powers together. And of course the whole creation of Police and Crime Commissioners, setting up a kind of visible presence for which you can then run the police and criminal justice policy in the area. That was very much one of her big causes in the last Parliament. So I'm sure she'll want to say more about it in the weeks ahead. But Theresa's experience and instincts in this area, I think, are very strong.
And just finally on the north-south divide between Brown and Greenfield.
Well, it is true that the North has a lot of brownfield land, and it is absolutely key that it should be regenerated. And wherever you are across the North, you see some brilliant examples of that. And actually, I don't agree with the characterisation of the MPPF. The adoption of the MPPF and the repeal of the previous regional spatial strategies that dictated things like green belt reviews, that's no longer available to the government. The MPPF is very clear that you should make use of previously developed land.
Okay, let's take another three. Right at the back. Let's hand up right at the back there. Who's on this side? Yeah, and then there's one on the end there.
Hi, Alison Bunn, I'm the chair.
Sorry, hang on. Can we take the one at the back first? Sorry.
Alison Bunn, I'm the chair of Greater Manchester Youth Network. I think one of the key aspects of the Northern Powerhouse is the investment of young people, because they are the political and business leaders of the future and obviously the next generation of entrepreneurs. How do you propose to secure their involvement now in the development sort of stages? You've mentioned education in the manifesto, but obviously we need to secure their physical and mental investment in the Northern Powerhouse concept going forward.
Thank you. Yes, and over there.
Father Emmanuel Kahn from St. Aidan's in Levenshulme, Manchester. I've heard very little about the role of voluntary organizations and local communities and local groups. And I think everyone will be aware of how much they're going to the wall and how little funds they have. That is very much a central government initiative that will stop the Northern Powerhouse unless the local authorities, local communities, and local groups and community centers and churches and synagogues and all the other cultural groups in the cosmopolitan North receive sufficient resources.
Thank you. And there was somebody here, yes, on the second row.
Tony Stacey from South Yorkshire Housing Association. I sit on the housing board of the Sheffield City Region LEP, and one of the things which I argue for regularly is that in terms of ambition, we shouldn't stop at devolution of assets, budgets, this sort of thing. We should really be looking at policy devolution, whether that's rent setting, whether it's new capital programs to invest. Every time I say it, I'm told Whitehall wouldn't wear that. Where's the block, Greg? Is that you that's stopping that happening?
I think, shall I answer that?
Yeah.
I think, Tony, you know the answer to that. Tony and I have worked with each other for a number of years on areas of mutual interest. And Tony's Housing Association and PlayShape as the group that it's part of, I think is a very good example of some of the points that were made about young people, about voluntary organisations, that actually this is not just about elected civic leaders, vitally important though they are. It's very important to get the whole of civil society engaged in the conversation locally about what we can do to increase the prosperity, social as well as economic and indeed environmental of an area. Specifically to your point about what the right of initiative, as it were, to be able to do things differently. This is absolutely crucial. When we launched the City Deals programme, the one proviso that I extracted from the Cabinet before I started any discussions at all was that something had to be taken off the table, which was the ability to veto a proposal from a place on the basis that it was not in line with national policy. You could critique the policy, you could say this was a kind of, whatever proposal it was, you could say this is not going to work, you could say it doesn't make sense, you could say it hasn't got adequate robustness around it, but you could not say we can't do it because it's not done, it's not in line with national policy. And that proved absolutely crucial. And I think that should apply generally. It's not to say that you should agree with every proposal. We invented this concept of deals. It is a deal. It's a deal between a local place and central government. There needs to be something in it for both sides, for the nation as well as the place. But you should be able to have that negotiation and the right of initiative for good ideas. I think that's been absolutely essential. It's what we've done through the devolution process. Shall I just pick
briefly,
up on, briefly on the other
minutes,
point?
yeah.
So I think for central government to be funding directly individual organisations, especially ones that are very local, I think is pretty difficult. Sometimes it happens, and there are some funding streams that back particular organisations. But I would much rather transfer power and resources to local councils for them to be able to work with civil society in their area. And the same with young people. I mean, the educational and skills aspects of devolution, I think, are incredibly important, and recovering from some of the imbalances that Philip pointed out. And again, I think the people that can best engage young people, the people who are the leaders, whether civic or community leaders in those communities, rather than central government reaching to particular groups of young people in particular areas. People know their place best, and we should empower them to have those conversations and to make the changes that they suggest.
And young people?
I mean, to speak to the young people's point first, I think it's a very, very good point, and I think it's absolutely crucial. I think the cultural aspect has to be completely decisive. In my hotel, there's a book about Manchester, and it was going through all the bands, and from Joy Division up to the Stone Roses. And I just thought, gosh, how decisive these young people were, how absolutely foundational and decisive. And what I sort of worry a bit when I look at the sort of northern councils is a lot of them are closing down concert venues, a lot of them are trying to sideline the cultural activities through which young people express themselves. I think that's a terrible, terrible mistake. And so I'd very much like to involve young people, not just in the culture, but also education and training. I mean, sort of our education idea isn't limited just to kind of, the secondary stage. We have to reintegrate our universities on our FE options, on our training options, with the hopes, desires and aspirations of young people. Crucially, we need to stop anybody thinking the moment they hit 18, they have to go down to London. That's the real measure. I mean, Robert Huff, spoke very brilliantly last night, who's chair of Liverpool LEP, sadly stepping down, about why don't we say to universities that 5% of their budget is reliant on them keeping graduates in their area for a long time. Change the incentives. I agree with him. And I think that's absolutely crucial. As to the voluntary organisations point, I strongly believe in voluntary organisations. I was one of those who help cast and create and argue for the big society. I still believe in that. In our manifesto, there's a little paragraph where I say that voluntary work should accompany a tax-free allowance, so that if you do voluntary work, in addition to the tax-free allowance that everyone else does, you should have a corresponding tax-free allowance on top of that that will allow whatever other work you do to be freed of tax. Now, that won't be enormous, because it will only be, but it will be some form of incentive. And that's what I mean by a no-tax North. Given that actually civil society is incredibly strong in the North, you know, many of our great social and voluntary institutions were founded in northern cities. If we can create this type of incentive for voluntary, transformative social activity, this, I hope, will go some way towards making a difference. And there's another point on health. There's an idea mooted, and it's kind of happening in parts, but not at scale, of personal health budgets. If the state spends any money on you at all, for any problem you have, that's an asset. And I would like to see voluntary organisations that are genuinely trying to help people who the state also spends money on to get better, for them to retain some portion of the transformation that they enacted in order to make their activities self-sustaining. And I think if, you know, the churches, for instance, I know because I've studied it, they sometimes have the very best results on welfare to work, or the very best results dealing with the hardest people to reach. And yet they often get no return for that, so it becomes very difficult to sustain. And I think this is what we need from the North, is to come up with new policies, new incentives. I love the point about devolution of policy, and I agree with it. And so I think it's all up there for grabs. What we really need to do, in my view, and what I hope this conference is the beginning of this, is really have a conference of the imagination. Really have a conference about, goodness, what could we do together potentially to change everything? So instead of having frustrated conversations, we can have expansive, visionary conversations about what we would do if we were in power. Because what Greg said, and so much of this is down to Greg and his good officers, is actually potentially the North could be in power. So let's paint a vision that will get massive popular local political support. And then let's ask government and ask ourselves, are we equal to that vision?
Thank you. Now, we're basically out of time, but I want to give 2 or 3 of you the last word so that you can at least say what you were going to say. So if you had a question, turn it into a rhetorical point, because we probably won't have time for Greg and Philip to respond. So there's 2 hands up there. There's 1 up there, and then we'll give you the last word.
Mark Thompson, Calderdale Council, and non-exec director of Rochdale Borough Housing. For me, what's missing is an alternative vision, not a vision that sees how the North can ape the South, not a vision that's all about economic growth and necessarily conventional prosperity. If we want something distinctive from the North, it's got to get off that hook and think more about our values and our environment. The word new mayorality was mentioned. I thought it almost got close to new morality, and that's what's really needed and what can drive something important and distinctive for the North.
Thank you. And there was another person up there, wasn't there? Could you just pass up? Who was it? Yeah, okay.
Hi, my name's Mark from 24 Housing Magazine. This is a question for Greg. How do you think...
No questions. Just make a point.
The amendments that were turned down by Kerslake were basically allowing local authorities around the country to do what they want with housing and affordable. Do you think that... Well, I can't ask a question now, can I? So
Talk to me afterwards.
Scrap the point. But yeah.
Grab him afterwards. There was a hand up there as well, wasn't there?
Alan Riley, Institute for Statecraft, London. My point is simply this, that it's all very well talking about the Northern Powerhouse, but in truth, we are living in the most centralised state in Europe. Even the second most centralised state. You know, if you talk to the mayor of Marseille, he has an enormous amount of capacity to act, to finance, to move in a way which nobody in England, including the mayor of London, could do. And if you think about it in terms of how the city was built, the municipal bond market, the global municipal bond market, was built in the 19th century by local authorities in England. Since the 1970s, the Treasury has shut off all of the local authorities from that. You can't simply build a local commercial bank like the German Länder could do. So we can talk about all of this, and we can create lots of structures, and we can talk about policies. But in terms of real power to change, to affect change and create an economic future, which we could do in the 19th century, we can't do this in the 21st century. And as long as the state remains centralised, and despite all of Greg's good wishes, I cannot see the centralised machine in London ever letting us do that. Perhaps he can demonstrate how that could be the case, but I see no sense, no change of that. Everything else ultimately is PR if you don't have the levers.
Okay, thank you. Over there.
Laura Edwards from UK Youth Parliament and Salford Youth Council. With devolution in Greater Manchester, there was no referendum and people are quite angry about that. Whilst I think some of the ideas in this manifesto are brilliant, there's not much talk of community. And even in your speech, when you were talking about the problems of the North, you were talking in third person, the people of the North. And when you're talking of the solutions and your ideas, you were talking in first person, plural, saying we. And the communities of Greater Manchester feel a lot like you can identify the problems, but it's Southerners imposing ideas on Northerners. And I'd really like community involvement. I'd really like to see community involvement and us to prove that the Northern Powers isn't a sham.
We were all born in we're all born in the north. 2 from Liverpool, 1 in Middlesbrough.
Yeah, but we have all left.
There is that.
And the last word here.
Hi. Is this working? Yeah. Simon Chisholm from Resonance. We invest into social enterprises, and I wanted to mention social enterprises, something that I think links a lot of the points that have been made. You know, how to get the spirit of community organisations onto a more sustainable basis, how to have organisations that are inherently local and pick up on the local need and respond to it. So can we keep social enterprise, which is a very regional thing, and we work in Manchester, we work all around the country, at the top of the agenda in terms of developing the Northern Powerhouse?
Thank you very much indeed for those. And can I ask you to thank Greg Clark and Phillip for that session? You can stay here.
I think we'll go and sit at the front.